There's a lot of talk about training family caregivers in our caregiving space, especially because Medicare introduced a benefit that provides training for family caregivers. What does training mean, though, from the family caregiver's perspective? That's what we're going to talk about today during this episode of the Caring Professional Reset podcast. Hi, everyone. I'm Denise Brown. We meet twice a month for 30 minutes to take a deeper dive into an issue that impacts family caregivers, and then we put it into practice. And in November 2025, we're talking about training. Let's start with a review of how Medicare defines the training that family caregivers can receive and who can provide that training. So it's a Part B benefit, and an adult child can receive this training on behalf of their care's Medicare plan. So if the caregiver is not Medicare eligible, it doesn't matter. As long as the caree has Medicare, then that family caregiver can receive training. And they give some examples of what that training could look like. So it's part of a treatment plan that includes giving medications, helping with daily tasks, transfers, communicating effectively, understanding the medical condition and diagnosis, and that family caregiver can receive personalized care and emotional support. It also includes more critical, complex care needs like preventing bed sores and infections and wound care. So it always has to start with a doctor's order. The doctor orders the training. And then individuals who can provide that training include doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and physical and occupational therapists. In my mind, the professionals who probably will provide this training will be physical and occupational therapists, as well as speech language pathologists. There is a 20% copay because it is a Medicare Part B benefit. And typically the caree will have a supplemental insurance that will cover that 20% copay. So that's what Medicare is doing in terms of providing training for family caregivers. I am not sure about utilization of this. And I think it would be interesting if there's a way we could track it. Certainly, a family caregiver could receive training in a hospital setting before the caree is discharged. So for me, I received training on how to provide ostomy care for my dad. He had bladder cancer, which spread. It spread from his bladder to a kidney and then to his ureter. And then he had surgery to remove those organs, a kidney, his bladder, his ureter, and then he had unrelated prostate cancer that they discovered during that surgery. So his prostate was removed as well. Before he was discharged, my mom and I received training on how to provide ostomy care. So he no longer has a bladder, which means they created a new output for his urine, and it was just off to the side on his abdomen. And so we learned how to add a bag to collect the urine and to change it. Now, my dad was supposed to do it, but he could not do it. He just couldn't do it. So I provided ostomy care, then my mom did, and then my sister and I did. My dad had surgery in 2015, and then he died in 2023. My mom and I received training in his hospital room, which was part of the oldest section possible of the hospital, which meant that it was a semi-private room that was really tight. It would have been tight if it was a private room. And basically there was room for 2 chairs off to the side, a privacy curtain, and 2 little beds. And when my mom and I were receiving training on how to care for his ostomy, his roommate had a visitor. Oh, sorry for these little emojis that pop up. His roommate had a visitor and it was distracting. And I asked the nurse if we could ask his roommate's visitor to step outside while we went through this training, and she said no. No. It was so disturbing to see the wound that they created for this new output that my mom had to sit in this chair pushed off to the side because there really wasn't room for it. I thought she was going to pass out. I took video of this training, and here's what's so, I want to say interesting, but it's not. What happened was, then when he went home, his wound was completely different. It had healed. So what we needed to do was different. The process was the same, but the supplies changed. Kind of a nightmare. And the nightmare continued. It continued. So when I think about training around family caregiving, it's really important that we keep that perspective in mind. What's helpful for the family caregiver? So just a quick update about who I am. So I started supporting family caregivers in 1990, cared for my parents, and created a concept that stages the caregiving experience. And I created it in 1997, and I regularly update it. And in October of 2025, we use the 6 caregiving stages to think about how we support family caregivers throughout their experience. And we're going to do the same thing, thinking about it from the perspective of training. Because here's the thing. If a professional decides to train a family caregiver without realizing that that family caregiver has been in their experience for years and trains them on something they already do, you've lost the family caregiver. Lost them. Like who would want to go through a training where you're like, yeah, I've been doing this for years. I already know this. And I think it's really important that we think about where is the family caregiver along their journey? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I also think it's really important that we ask questions to gain insights about what the family caregiver needs. So for instance, we can ask, what do you need from training? Because we don't want to assume what they need, because then that assumption might not meet their need. So I was thinking of some questions to ask before training starts. And I think this is helpful for anyone. So we have an insight into what Medicare is describing around training and how to provide that training, who can and how it's reimbursed. But that's just a portion of training that a family caregiver needs. And we can think about training happening within support groups, for instance, if there's an opportunity for a guest speaker to come in and do some education. It could happen in an in-person workshop that takes place at a church or a house of worship. It could take place during a conference where there is some insights into hands-on care. So certainly it's important that family caregivers know about the benefit through Medicare. And that's not the only training that they need. Benefit from. So when we think about ourselves, for instance, as individuals who serve and support family caregivers, there's opportunities for us to be kind of like a trainer. And if we think about training about the experience, about stress management, about coping, these questions could apply as well. And then for the professionals that are doing some more hands-on care training, these questions can help too. So what worries do you have about providing care? What information do you need to feel confident? What can I teach you that could be helpful? What's the worry that keeps you up at night? What do you worry could happen? So with my dad and his ostomy care, oh, it was kind of a nightmare because his skin was so fragile. And they really didn't take that into account when they trained us. And so he had terrible inflamed rashes that qualified him for wound care, really. So he had home health for his wound around his stoma, which is his new output for his urine. It was a nightmare trying to actually take care of that. And I asked probably 12 or 13 different nurses for help. And it wasn't until his general practitioner connected us to an ostomy nurse at our local hospital versus the hospital we were going to. And she was awesome. And she said, you have to change his bag every 2 days. And they had insisted at the other hospital that it be changed every 5 days. And we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it because it just, his skin was so sensitive. Anyway, so what I worried that would happen is I would be my dad's cause of death, that on his death certificate, it would say cause of death, Denise. And her incompetence around ostomy care. I really felt that. There was so much pressure. It's not complicated, but it was a lot of pressure. And I think it would have been helpful if a professional had taken a little time to talk it out with me. Ultimately, it wasn't until we started palliative care and had been using the same palliative care nurse for about a year that we had an honest conversation about ostomy care. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they told you every 5 days. That's wrong. But by then, Anyway, we also can keep in mind the environment where training happens. So a couple questions we can think as trainers about our environment include, what can we add so that environment is soothing? What can we eliminate or reduce so the environment isn't distracting? Think about a long-term care facility and that staff, PT and OT, helping that family caregiver with new skills and new responsibilities to get ready for that caree to be discharged back home. That oftentimes is loud and hectic. So what could, for instance, that therapy room look like and sound like so there aren't so many distractions? There are things that we can do in our environment that make a difference that don't have to be a big deal, but make a big impact. Thinking about noise, timing, what it looks like, and then how are we in our environment? Composed, calm, caring. We want to give confidence through encouragement. And then thinking about how training is delivered, it can be in person, it can be virtual, and it can be on demand. We have an on-demand program for family caregivers that's free, and I'll tell you about that before we close today. And then I just want you to keep in mind, though, that Medicare has its own requirements. So if you are, for instance, an OT or a PT thinking about how could a doctor refer to you, you want to make sure you're following the requirements that Medicare has specified. And then if we're demonstrating a skill, I thought of some questions we can ask. When do you do something similar? What a great question to ask a family caregiver, because they might be doing something similar. And it's so helpful for us to know that. So we demonstrate a skill and then ask, when do you do something similar? And then we'll know basically what baseline of experience they have. If we're showing them something new that they'll have to start doing, if we ask this question, when do you do something similar? We know that they aren't new. There's some experience to it. And if they say, I've never done anything like that before, then we know, okay, there's going to be more nerves. There's going to be more questions. Perhaps they'll need more time. If they're already doing something similar, then we know that they have insights that will help with this additional skill. Asking, what do you worry about when you complete this skill? And what can I leave with you that will be helpful when you're completing this skill? These are some questions, not all the questions. And I also think depending on the type of training, you'll think of good questions to ask. But I wanted to really introduce this idea that I think in any training that we offer to family caregivers, it has to include questions we ask them, because it's helpful for us to make sure the training we're delivering is effective for them. So when we think about training for expectant caregivers, people give me a hard time about expectant caregivers all the time, and I think, I don't care. So, because how do we reach them? They don't self-identify. Ugh, it doesn't matter. Because what everyone in the world needs is family emergency planning. And everyone in the world is an expectant caregiver. It doesn't matter if they know that or not, but family emergency planning puts them in a place where they're starting to think about who needs what in case of an emergency. It's perfect for anyone who hasn't started a caregiving experience. It's necessary for everyone. And I talk about this regularly. And just a reminder, when we're thinking about preparing for weather disasters, everybody has to have a plan to manage floods. Everyone. Flooding is one of the weather emergencies that could impact all of us. So the expectant caregiver, just as a refresher, hasn't started caregiving, but in the future could be caring for someone. And because we don't know when or how, we're all expectant caregivers. Doesn't matter if we know it or not, because what we're going to do is deliver a service that's appropriate for everyone. And then it helps that individual start thinking about who needs what in case of an emergency. And then when we start to help, we move into the freshman stage. Just a reminder, some people feel like they skip over this stage because you're just starting to help. When I think about this, it is the first entree into the healthcare system. There's a diagnosis, there might be a hospitalization, and I really think education around the 19 caregiving systems and the 6 caregiving stages can be helpful. It doesn't have to be in depth. It is just an awareness that there are multiple systems to navigate, manage, and advocate within, and that there are stages. In addition, because this might be the time when a family member receives a diagnosis, it's so helpful to do some training around what happens now that there's a diagnosis. How do we help you schedule appointments, coordinate between general practitioner and specialists, stay on top of medical records, stay on top of different systems and their medical records and their portals. Oh, ugh. And it could be starting to educate about medications. And I think it's really helpful to have kind of an overview of what a family caregiver will want to know regardless of the medication. Questions to ask when a new medication is prescribed, like when, with what are the side effects, what to do about the side effects. So there's general knowledge that can be shared here that can be helpful when the family caregiver moves into the entrenched stage. So you can see how setting them up in that second stage helps them in that third stage when it is all about caregiving. And again, we're going to continue with education about the disease process, but now there might be more equipment and supplies. And so we want to make sure they're comfortable with equipment and supplies and what that caregiving space looks like. Where do they keep supplies? How do they organize them? How do they make sure they track them so that they're ordering them so they always have some? And what kind of supplies are important to have on hand regardless of a disease? And the one that I learned about is non-stick pads for wounds, because my dad's skin was so fragile. If you looked at him, he'd have a wound. And if we didn't use non-stick, guess what? It was an open wound that gauze would stick to. Nightmare, nightmare. Non-stick bandages, the paper tape, all of that is so important to keep on hand. And that's really helpful for a family caregiver to know. So educating about supplies, not just only supplies related to a disease, but supplies related to what happens when someone gets older, what happens to their body, like very fragile skin. It's also about educating more specifically around the systems and the stages, especially around when to start palliative care. It's also helpful to think about how to educate a family caregiver when to alert the healthcare team. So for instance, when OT and PT might be training the family caregiver, it could be helpful to introduce the idea that here are triggers to keep in mind that you'll want to let your doctor know about. And in the fourth stage, the family caregiver is now adjusting. It's not such a shock what happens during a caregiving experience. There are tornadoes that still kick up and they're able to calm them down. And it's helpful to update the family emergency planning process because care needs might be different. Priorities might be different. Values might be different. This could be a stage, not always, but it could be where the caree really starts to say, please don't call 911. Please, let's not go to the emergency room. And again, it's training around the disease, the process, what the disease needs, and then more in-depth training around the systems and the stages. What's interesting about the stages is that a family caregiver feels so much better when they get to this stage. And the stages as a concept helps them celebrate that they moved from entrenched to pragmatic. We just had this happen in our training program for coaches. It's a certified caregiving consultant training. One of our training program participants is in a caregiving situation. She learned about the stages. She understood why she was feeling as she was feeling. It was a relief to her. And because she started thinking, oh, I'm not making this harder. It is this hard. I'm not a terrible person because I have these emotional responses. She was able to move to the pragmatic stage. And when she shared that she now considered herself to be a pragmatic caregiver, the smile on her face was huge. She was so happy about it. That's education. Okay. Ah. And then the transitioning caregiver is around the transition from doing to being before a caree's death. It's our transition. We're not going to do like we did before. We're going to really focus on how can we be. So we're not going to feel like I need to find another specialist. I need to consider another treatment. We need to figure something else out. It is allowing the natural cycle of life, and that requires us to be. And then after, it is around closing out our caregiving experience. So this would be educating about the timing of hospice care, pain management, end-of-life care needs, and one of the most important insights to share with family caregivers is that during hospice, when a caree is really at the last stage of life, it often requires 24-hour care because pain meds are dispensed every 4 hours, and hospice does not provide 24-hour care, and it's up to the family to figure it out. And for the family to figure it out the day that the hospice nurse says, you need to start administering pain meds every 4 hours is the worst day for them to figure that out. So you could see how training is so important just around education. One other thing I think about, when I started hospice services for my mom, she really waited to the last minute, and she just wasn't ready. And when she was ready, I was ready. I had been ready for months. And then when she was like, okay, I was like, yes, okay. And I just really badgered the hospice organization because they just did not have it together. And it was one of our best in our community. And it just really, anyway, when I finally was able to say, when are you coming to start us? I was on the phone with one of their employees, one of the nurses, We were scheduling the first intake appointment so we could start the services. And the nurse started really lecturing me about hospice services, which I did not need a lecture about. And then she started really telling me what to do when I had to introduce the idea of a hospital bed for my mom. And she wanted me to manipulate with lies. Like, this is what she was telling me on the phone. Like, I would never manipulate my mom with lies. Like, wow, never, never, never in a million years. What she wanted me to do was treat my mom like she was a child. And I never would ever do that. I was so insulted. I didn't say anything. All I wanted to do was get off the phone. But that's the worst way to provide training, to tell a family caregiver to do something that is just morally reprehensible to them. Like like this was, how many years ago? 4 years ago, and I still get irate about it. Oh, so again, it's asking questions. Hospice is going to start. That means new equipment is going to come into the space. What do you worry about with the hospital bed arriving? Just ask that and then let the family caregiver say, I'm not sure. My mom is so strong-willed and independent. I'm just not sure. I know that she's at end of life, but I'm wondering about how to introduce the hospital bed to her. And then the follow-up question is, how have you introduced other difficult topics with your mom? Because they've already done that. Like, I had to tell my mom the year before her son died, my brother died. You know, the way I told her, I said, I am so sorry, Mom, Tim just died. I just told her. I didn't manipulate or treat her like a child. I just told her. So if those two questions had been part of that conversation, I would have a different story that I was telling you now. The family caregiver is introducing difficult subjects all the time. We become a master at how to deliver bad news. And it's so helpful when the professional sees us doing that and knows that we do that and then just helps us do it again by supporting what we've already done. And that's really about any topic related to training. And I just wanted to mention the Godspeed caregiver. This is the 6th stage, and I think about it as a couple years after caregiving has ended, when we're really moving into the next stage of our life. We've moved out of caregiving. We've given time to reflect, to reconcile, to resolve. And this is when a lot of individuals will come to me to take training to be a support group leader because they want to start a support group in their church, their house of worship, or they want to start a caregiving coaching business. So there's opportunities for training in the Godspeed caregiver stage for them to give to current family caregivers. And it can be helpful to think about, what could that look like within your organization, for instance? Is it training mentors? Is it adding support groups and you provide the training for a former family caregiver to become that support group leader? The other part of it is, when I talked about the training could be virtual, it also could be different social media posts. And perhaps there's a family caregiver that you connected with and served during their caregiving experience. They come back to you a couple years after caregiving ended and say, I'd like to help. If they are a guru, like a master at social media, have them start to work on a social media campaign that educates family caregivers. That would be awesome. So there's different ways to really use that skill and those skill sets and that knowledge base and that wisdom. Okay, I went through this kind of quickly. 30 minutes. I just wanted to feel like this is like a lunch break for you. So that's why you only do 30 minutes. So we're going to connect again. So we always start on the first Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with a deeper dive into a particular topic. And then we put it into practice and talk about it on the second Friday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join me live if you'd like. And you can also listen to our podcast and watch on our YouTube channel, as well as on our community, caringourway.com. So you've got lots of options. If you just like to listen, It's a podcast if you like to watch. It's a YouTube show. So when we get together for practice lab, I'd love for you to personalize this a little bit and think about, what stage are you in? If you're an expectant family caregiver, what would be helpful for you in terms of family emergency planning? And then I'd love for you to think about a family caregiver you recently helped. What stage do you think they were in? What training could they have benefited from receiving? If they received it, what was that experience like for them? Okay, that's practice lab. All right, quickly, just want to tell you that we do have a certified family care manager program. That's for family caregivers. It's free. It's on our community, caringourway.com. And we really think about, what does a family caregiver need to feel confident about their experience? The other reason that I launched this is because it is now a profession to list on a resume and on a LinkedIn profile. If a family caregiver has taken a break from their career because of caregiving, they now have a title of a profession and they can list what they did. Saved my mom $2,000 by reviewing Medicare bills. Organized a team of 5 to take care of a family member with 3 chronic care illnesses. Like, wow. I mean, it's really impressive. Really impressive. And then we do offer CEUs for our podcast when you join our Caregiving Support CEU Training Center. It's $100 for an annual membership, and you can earn as many as 20 CEUs. And it's on sale in November. You can save 20% with coupon code November. That's a great deal. You'd be paying $80 to get 20 CEUs. We have an archive of videos you can watch to earn your CEUs, and we are up to something like 40 different classes. And it's particularly helpful if you are specializing in supporting family caregivers. You'll gain lots of great insights as you earn your continuing ed units for professional development and to keep your license, like your nursing and social work licenses, up to date. Okay, we did it. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate it. And I'd love for you to share your experiences either receiving or delivering training as a family caregiver or for family caregivers. That would be really helpful. So feel free to share in the comment section, because I'd love to know your experiences. Okay, thanks so much for watching and listening. I'm Denise Brown, and I'll see you next time.